I wonder if I could. I'm writing a piece right now for publication called "The Primacy of Israel in Our Lives." There was an opinion piece, Rav, in the Guardian, and I'm sorry for mentioning that to you, but I do read the Guardian by one of their. I know you're laughing. Okay, fine.
No,
I have to read
I'm
the
thinking,
enemies
I'm
of the
thinking, I'm thinking, as you said that, I was thinking of the Mishnah in Masechet Avot, which states, Da malo hashiv, know how to respond to the epikoros, to the apostate,
correct.
to the denier. In order to know, you have to know what they say, what they think.
Correct. There was an opinion piece last week, a very well-written opinion piece by one of their writers by the name of Jonathan Friedland. And the opening quote is very interesting, especially coming from The Guardian. He said, "Those who attack Jews in the UK are not striking a blow for Palestine. They are behaving as anti-Semites always have," end quote. Now, I checked quickly to see if that was The Guardian. And yes, it was The Guardian, and he wrote that. So I'm starting off by saying that, in my opinion, this well-written piece makes one major mistake, namely that Israeli leaders must take Galut Jews into account when making national security decisions. From my perspective, Israel's fate, not that of our foreign communities, should be of paramount concern to our leaders, because Galut will always be a fundamentally unsafe environment for Jews, regardless of what actions are taken by Israel to safeguard our existence. In other words, it's time that Galut Jews finally wake up to the fact that they are living in societies that hate them and that will never accept them as equal citizens. Indeed, I've tried repeatedly to point out to Galut Jews that it's not just the eruption of long dormant anti-Semitic sentiments that should scare them into making Aliyah, but rather the passivity and even encouragement of their respective governments to this age-old hate that should spur them into coming home as soon as possible. So that's my opening blast. I've actually talked about such issues granted, in my own defense. When I got out of prison, I was in New York, and there were a lot of people that were angry with me in the Jewish establishment for having put Israel's security and Israel's interests ahead of the security and the interests of the Jewish American or American Jewish community. They said that I had, and people of my ilk, as they said, had endangered the diaspora communities because of the issue of dual loyalty. And I said point blank to them that, yes, we have a notion of dina de malchuta dina, that the laws of the land where you live are the laws, but that there are certain circumstances that force Jews in Galut to put the interests of Israel and our people in Israel ahead of their own communities, regardless as to the cost. And this was something, at least from the elite standpoint, from the ostensible leaders of the American Jewish community, was anathema, absolutely anathema. That the United States in particular was the golden Medina, that it was as equally important as Israel was, and that we had an obligation to recognize the fact that we had a second homeland. And that was something that, if somebody makes a statement like that, I have no response. I have no response. We have one homeland. It's called Eretz Yisrael, Eretz HaKodesh. We don't have multiple homelands. It's not Monsey or Lakewood. Ir Hakodesh lahavdil lahavdalot. I don't believe that.
This has unfortunately always been one of our reprehensible weaknesses of the Jewish people, or many of the Jewish people, going back literally 2,500 years. As Rabbi Yehuda Levi, in his book, The Kuzari, writes, the reason that most of the Jews, when they were given official permission by the Persian Emperor Cyrus, Koresh, to return to their homeland,
didn't.
The vast majority did not. Something like 3% did. That's it. 97% stayed put.
With Ezra and Nehemiah.
That was about 60 years. Ezra was about 60 years later, and
right.
Shortly after that. That's also an interesting discussion, the historical timeline and all the rest of it. But people, for instance, we'll talk about this perhaps more another time, closer to Purim, that is now exactly 2,500 years from the events of Purim. And the huge Jewish population that was exiled to Bavel, to Babylon, and the surrounding countries and Persia, the vast majority chose not to return when they were given that opportunity. And why? Why was this? Because they were comfortable. They felt that where we are is okay. We're not missing anything. What are we lacking? It was like a certain educator that I know told me that when he, on a number of occasions, was in the United States, and he spoke to the Jews there, and he was giving a lecture, and he always likes to tell them off for the fact that they're living in the United States, which of course doesn't make him very popular.
No.
And he asked them, why don't you come home? And they say, what are we missing here? We have our synagogue and Jewish schools and Jewish stores and kosher food, and you name it, we've got it. Everything's fine. We're not missing anything. Well, that's a very lame and poor argument, but for most people it works until the situation takes a turn for the worse, until things begin to unravel. And then Jews, often too late, ask themselves the question, why didn't we make a move when we could have, when things were easier? Even if it only comes to, the difference is only between selling your house for its true value, its real worth on the market, or having to sell for a fraction of its true price because of a given political and social situation, as happened to many Jews in Germany, for example. So, unfortunately, this is nothing new, but that does not justify it or legitimize it in any way. I wanted to point out that the claim made by certain Jews in various countries, particularly I think in America, for interesting and for historical reasons that can be analyzed and described, but we won't go into that now. So many Jews in America really did adopt the United States as a homeland.
Correct.
You cannot say the same about Jews in Canada, or Jews in Australia, or Jews in South Africa.
Anywhere else?
No, it's an American phenomenon. It's a very interesting phenomenon, but we won't go into that now in detail. Their complaint that someone such as yourself, because of what you did, in other words, putting the Jewish people first and standing up for what is correct and true and moral and just, even if it possibly brings about some form of censure on the part of their Gentile neighbors, that claim is reprehensible on the one hand, but it's also not new. Going back 2,000 and 2,200 odd years, I refer to the Hasmonean revolt led by the Hashmonaim which became a very large-scale popular uprising, military uprising, armed uprising against the Greco-Syrian rulers of
occupiers.
our land, occupiers of our land, which we celebrate every year at Hanukkah. The victory and the positive outcome of that revolt. There were Jews. Most of the Jews lived in the area known as Yehuda, Judea, which is essentially the area of Jerusalem, and everything north of Jerusalem up to Beth El, which is, if people don't know where that is, some people might know where the Arab town of Ramallah is. It's next door. So it's somewhat north of Jerusalem and south of Jerusalem, roughly down to Beersheba, shall we say. That was and up to the coast of Azza, which was a place where many Jews lived, of course, for thousands of years. That was Judea, but that was not the full extent of Jewish settlement or Jewish expansion. There were Jews living in the north of the country, in the Galil, on the east bank of the Jordan, in Evan HaYarden, and other places where they were a distinct minority. And some of them wrote to the Maccabees, to the Hashmonaim, saying,
Stop.
Some of them complained and wrote a letter, and this is recorded in Hashmonaim Bet, in the second book of the Maccabees. They wrote to the leaders of the Jewish
revolt,
shall we call it the revolt, and essentially the new provisional government of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel. And they said to them, because of your actions, in other words, fighting the Jewish people's enemies, now we're suffering the consequences. Our Gentile neighbors are rising up against us, and they were attacking them and killing them. It wasn't an empty statement.
Complaint.
True. So what did the Jewish leadership, how did they respond? They wrote back to them and they said, this is recorded, word for word, we are fighting for our lives and reclaiming our homeland and our heritage, and we're willing to die for our right to live as Jews in our country, because that was the choice, to live as a Jew or to or rather to die as a Jew or to live as a non-Jew.
To assimilate into Greco.
They were being
Syrian
forced
culture
by government decree to abandon the Torah, to abandon Judaism. So you could either die as a Jew or live as a non-Jew, and they refused that choice, and they chose to live as Jews, to fight as Jews, and hopefully to continue living, and if necessary to die, but not to acquiesce to such policies. So that's what we are doing. And if where you live things are not going well, then come and join us. That was their response.
Wow.
In so many words. If things
Very
are not
smart.
where you are, come to us.
Come home.
Yeah, come to us. Come home. Join us. And in fact, the Maccabim, the Hashmonaim, did send some military armed forces to go and assist those outlying Jewish communities that were under attack. But the overall message was to their Jewish brethren, come home. Perhaps this is a good and positive note on which to end for today. Jonathan, once again, it's been a pleasure, and to be continued, Be'ezrat Hashem, with Hashem's help. Hizku v'yames levavchem kol ha'meyahalim l'Adonai. May all those who yearn and strive for Hashem be strengthened and find solace, and may we be zocheh, may we merit to see victory over all our enemies. Shalom v'nisachah.
Amen. Shalom.
Shalom.